What are the 7 phrases that kill trust between you and a manager? Why are more workers saying the popular phrase from the movie Goodfellas, F you, pay me? Will we be talking about Bruno if the song Dos Oruguitas wins Best Song at the Oscars? We'll talk about all this and more on this debut beta test of a live audio show here on LinkedIn that you might think of as a group study session in the 21st century. We call it appropriately Creative Studies.
Quiet, please. Quiet, please. Creative Studies is in session. Creative Studies with Jeffrey Cologne. Office hours for the imagination age. Studying is different in the 21st century. Creative Studies with Jeffrey Cologne. Here on LinkedIn.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Hope you're having a great week. Welcome to Friday, wherever you're tuning in from around the world, and to our first episode of Creative Studies here on LinkedIn. I'm Jeffrey Cologne, your host for the next couple of minutes or so before we're kicked off the platform because we're treating it like pirate radio. We'll check out 3 of the latest trends in marketing, tech, media, and popular culture, and go deep on one cool topic you should know about with some killer stats in a segment we call Source Material. But before we begin, I just have this to say. Back in 2004, and yeah, maybe I'm dating myself, when I first started podcasting, almost every podcaster back then did live audio because it was cheap and easy. There was so much of a technical barrier to getting an audio file up and distributed. We didn't use Adobe Audition. We didn't even use GarageBand. We just plugged in some mics, went live for like 4 hours and talked. So I thought it was interesting as I've studied all the audio offerings that everyone has used them pretty much in a manner that is more boring than your standard webinar or event panel, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, we're talking about the last decade of most things that should be interesting being run by people who are more boring than watching paint dry. So I looked into how to bring in other media sources to make things more interesting. People are interesting, but our reactions to media, the language of the 21st century, is probably even more interesting. People enjoy and trust discussions, and interactive ones mixed with media sources, but not one of these forums really pushes for it. Maybe it's a copyright issue, but we don't hear much of it on Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces, or here on LinkedIn. So it's time to change that. The last thing the world needs is another person with a microphone. But hopefully, over the next half hour or so, and if I decide to do this on a weekly basis, we can hear from you and what you have to say about the trending topics at hand. Life is way more interesting as a collective and creative journey where we're all learning together. With that, I think it's time we get into our first segment. And of course, if you have things you want to say, don't forget to reach out. Hey, James, cue the sweeper.
Trending topics on Creative Studies. Here on LinkedIn. 7 phrases that kill trust.
Language is pretty important. It's not going to not be important any day soon. So I found this really interesting article in Fast Company this past week that I think would be fun to run down the list of 7 phrases we probably hear all the time in the workplace, but maybe we don't really want to hear those, or we don't really wonder if there are issues with them. So let's start with number 1 on that list. And of course, if you have more to add, make sure you share. Number 1, I'm sorry you feel that way. Number 2, I didn't say that. Number 3, it's company policy. Number 4, I know we promised this to you, but... Number 5, sorry, I changed my mind. Number 6, I need you in this role. And number 7, I'm sure everyone has heard this at one time in their professional career, copy me on everything. Copy that.
Trending topics on creative studies here on LinkedIn.
F you, pay me.
It's fascinating how a popular phrase from the 1992 movie Goodfellas is making the rounds again, and for all the right reasons. As we know, last month was Black History Month. This month it's Women's History Month. And of course, every month it should be a conversation on how much one should be paid for the work that they offer. As creatives, I think the number one area of difficulty is scoping work, how much you should be paid to provide a service. And the other is getting paid. Hey, we can pay you in 120 days after you invoice us, says the company who also tweeted they love equality, yet never want to get to the root of economic uncertainty being a form of holding back equal progress. Heck, you even have a company called F You Pay Me that is trying to push for more transparency on how influencers should be paid when offering creative services. Too many people still think exposure will help you pay the rent. F You Pay Me is a platform where influencers can anonymously share their experiences, collaborating with different brands and search crowdsourced compensation data, making it easier to figure out what price to charge for their services. It's like Glassdoor, but purpose-built for the needs of the influencer community. Let's be square with each other. I know we're all trying to cut costs, and that's your job. But it's not like anybody listening to this is swimming in cash either. Freelancers everywhere hear that the work they do for free can benefit their portfolio, or bring them publicity, or even lead to future paid work. Sadly, these things don't pay the rent or put food on the table. For many of us, creative work isn't a part-time job. It's our livelihood. It's why we get up in the morning. We're not going to do other things because we gain a lot from actual creations. You wouldn't ask a chef to make you a free meal or a doctor to give you a free surgery. Payment is about value, and if you don't pay your service providers, it shows you don't value them or the work they create. It might be a website for your business or photography for your wedding, quality items that you want to stand behind. So remember, you get what you pay for. And if you're not paying, you're not getting something you're very happy with. So with that said, if you're one of those persons who sees no value in paying others because they're doing creative work, remember this learning from an old friend of mine who was an accountant at Bertelsmann Music Group back in the day. Hey, if there were no creatives or creators, there'd be no need for an accountant, legal, or finance. Yeah, I said it. F you. Pay me.
Trending topics on creative studies here on LinkedIn.
We don't talk about Bruno.
How did we go from a world where a song from a streaming Disney classic, or I should say neo-classic, went to number 1 on the Billboard music charts? We have to think about the music industry for a minute. The chance of this happening without the combination of YouTube, streaming TV, TikTok, and social media is highly unlikely. I feel like radio is now a jukebox taking orders from us these days, not the other way around. Let's look at history here for a second. 20 years ago, you had to march into the offices of a program director in various cities and get them to add your music to their playlist. Now, they are basically listening to what people are finding is popular. The tables have been turned, and that, I must say, is pretty glorious.
Creative Studies, here on LinkedIn.
Everything is better with Creators, a new podcast that explores the creator economy, what it is, and where it's going. With your hosts Ashley Rudder, Emma Harmon, Marco Bertozzi, and Jamie Goodfriend, doing a deep dive into the insights and analysis of the biggest economic change we've experienced since the dawn of the industrial age 100 years ago. Everything is better with Creators, produced by Whaler. We power the creator economy.
It's Creative Studies, office hours for the imagination age. I'm Jeffrey Colon. This is the part we thank a sponsor, but we have none. So instead, a big shout out and thanks to LinkedIn and Jessica Oliveira for giving me access to the LinkedIn audio beta. And Rachel Bernstein from Standout Authority for introducing me to Jessica. I think one or both of them are hopefully listening to this. Also, feel free to connect with me on social media. I'm at DJGEOFFE on both Twitter and Instagram. And of course, you can send me a connection request or follow me here on LinkedIn. That music you hear in the background is from BT. It's a track called Kintsugi. BT, also known as Brian Transu. He's living in LA, originally a Washington, D.C. native. Had a bunch of big tunes back in the 1990s. Also scored the movie Go soundtrack. Hey, remember that movie with Katie Holmes from 1999? Sarah Polley was also in it. Doug Liman directed. There was a funny scene that took place in Vegas. Of course, there's always a funny scene that takes place in Vegas in Doug Liman films. BT is now recreating himself as an artist in the metaverse and video games. Speaking of the metaverse and video games, coming up we have our segment called Source Material, where we go deep with killer stats about a particular subject. This episode, what Spotify reveals about the music creator economy.
Source Material, where studying isn't a snooze. Creative Studies on LinkedIn.
Spotify has calculated how many of the 2.6 million artists on its platform with more than 10 tracks are popular enough to also have more than 10,000 monthly listeners. The answer? Just 165,000 acts. Separately, Spotify has estimated that 199,000 artists sold a ticket to a live concert in 2019 via the likes of Songkick, Ticketmaster, and other platforms. This is how Spotify gets to its estimate of 200,000 artists on its service that are, quote, professionally aspiring, end quote. To put it a slightly crueler way, 98% of the 8 million artists on Spotify today aren't popular enough to have 10,000 monthly listeners or have released fewer than 10 tracks to date. Spotify's own stats show that just 0.2% of the 8 million artists on its platform are generating $50,000 or more above per year. As a standalone stat, 0.2% sounds like a scandal. But now we can move that narrative on and ask what percentage of genuinely professional or professionally aspiring artists, that club of 200,000, are generating more than $50,000 a year on Spotify. Well, it's just over 8%. 8%, or around 1 in 12, artists deemed professionally or professionally aspiring by Spotify are now generating more than $50,000 on that one platform per year. Is 8% good enough? Is having 1 in 12 commercially meaningful artists generating $50,000 a year on Spotify a positive or a negative? Let that debate rage, but let it rage with the key information that the vast majority of artists on Spotify, 5.4 million, are more than 2/3 of all acts on the platform, haven't even released enough tracks to fill an album. Ooh. Okay, that's going to wrap up our debut episode of Creative Studies here on LinkedIn. We appreciate your time and attention and everyone who tuned in. And we would appreciate it even more if you would rate, review, and subscribe to the show, which I don't know how is possible because I don't know if you can subscribe to... I don't think you can subscribe to audio shows on here. The developer team, if you're listening, figure out a way to subscribe to shows. Tell others to tune in, or better, tell me some people we should have on as guests. I don't want to hear myself talk anymore. I haven't decided if I'll turn this into a full podcast, but if I get enough feedback, that's probably where this is headed. Once again, the socials, Twitter and Instagram, at DJGEOFFE is the handle. And make sure to give a follow or connect with me here on LinkedIn. Also, make sure to subscribe to the new podcast from Whaler. Everything is better with creators. They got a fun listen for episode 5 on all things about podcasts with Georgina Holt of Acast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and where all fine audio can be found. Next episode, more trending topics, and hopefully we'll be talking about Bruno. Go Encanto. Hope you win some Oscars. Creative Studies. We got new episodes every Friday. Until then, thanks for checking in and checking us out. I'm Jeffrey Colon. We'll catch you next time.
Creative Studies, created by Jeffrey Colon. All thoughts are his own, where studying isn't a snooze.